don't think he looks big enough.
Not our meat, our souls.
Ready when you are.
Sun, sand, Sylvester McCoy. Everything you need for a classic British summer, right here on tonight's live episode of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that has an infinite capacity for pretension, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. Tonight, child brides, hash-smoking bandits, sexually overexcited pensioners. That's right, it's OG Doctor Who as its creators intended it. We take our flying caravan right back to the start for a dose of Cathay culture in Marco Polo.
Man the girl, it's the leaf I want. Clara gives up her ring for a ride with the Doctor and soon discovers the perilous effects of too much sun on some 32-year-old foliage. The long song ends here. It's 2013's The Rings of Akhaten.
And pointless continuity porn, arguments about which Dalek is best, barely concealed racism. We love Doctor Who Twitter, so make sure you send us your feedback once you've listened to our review of 1988's Remembrance of the Daleks. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Matt. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us here on another I'll Explain Later live stream.
On tonight's programme,
on tonight's programme, we are returning to the usual format, the tried and trusted format, after...
we're both drinking.
A, we're both drinking. And B, I think it's fair to say that Trial of a Time Lord... They put it this way, for last month's Trial of a Time Lord, it wasn't just the Doctor on trial, really, was it? It was...
no, indeed not.
Something of a slog. But thank you, everyone, for your wonderful feedback on that episode. It was interesting to see... everyone's,
I particularly enjoyed the letters we received that weren't smeared in dog dirt.
I mean, it's always nice for me to get any post that's not smeared in dog dirt. But no, it was that was a bit of an epic for us. But tonight we are back with 3 classic Doctor Who serials as per the usual format, and we are starting tonight with Marco Polo, which I think has the unfortunate distinction of being the first ever Doctor Who story to be completely missing from the BBC's archives. So you're not even able to see a clip from this in the way that you can sometimes see a grainy clip of a sword fight from some of those early episodes. There's nothing in the can for this anymore, at least as far as we know. But it exists. There are telly snaps for 6 of the 7 episodes, and by some miracle, there are audio recordings, which I find it extraordinary that, this is the 4th ever Doctor Who story, but by this point there were fans of the show taping the audio off the air, putting their cassette recorders up next to or presumably reel-to-reels, up next to the TV set to make sure they kept this for posterity. And it's thanks to them we're able to enjoy this. So I listened to the version that's available on Audible, which is the soundtrack to the episodes with narration.
William Russell sort of narrated.
What I will say is that I've not really seen any of the telly snaps, or I've not looked through them in any detail. I've obviously seen a few of them, and I have obviously seen a lot of the colour photographs that were taken from the set. But I'm sure the visual side of this is something that we will either discuss or speculate on wildly.
I was going to ignore it completely.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I guess this is a podcast, it would be appropriate. So what happens in Marco Polo? So after the terrifying events of the Edge of Destruction, the TARDIS lands in the Himalayas, and the crew shack up with Marco Polo, who is on his way crossing what would be China, to go and visit Kublai Khan. and the year is 1289, and Marco Polo takes a shine to the Doctor's TARDIS and thinks that if he gives it as a gift to Kubla Khan, then he will be freed and allowed to return to Venice. But also travelling with the party is the warlord Tigana, who has designs on unsettling Kubla Khan's empire, and ultimately, it turns out, wants to kill Kubla Khan himself, and thinks that if he is able to get hold of the TARDIS, then he will be strengthened in his attempts to do that. So it's a 7-episode story where the TARDIS crew, the First Doctor, Ian, Barbara, Susan, are all tagging along as such. Getting involved in the adventure. It's a pure historical, other than the fact that the TARDIS brings the characters to the story. There are no other sort of extraneous sci-fi elements here. John, did you like Marco Polo?
So let's start with a few caveats, I suppose, or sort of housekeeping elements.
Yep. Please do.
It's. I was joking about not discussing the visuals because I think the visuals have led. This is probably. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say of the deleted Doctor Who, this is probably the one. I certainly get the sense this is the one that people would most like to be found because it's so richly epic, and it's not just that so much happens and they cover geographically such a huge array of different landscapes, and it would just be fascinating to see how that was done. But what we have got from the photographs really does suggest that this looked good. Like the costumes are so silky. Obviously, they're on the Silk Road. A lot of attention has gone into the kind of bivouacs and all the different settings. They start off in the Himalayan mountains, as you rightly said, and they go through staging posts along the Silk Road. They end up at the Palace of Kubla Khan. I mean, this sword fight, it's epic, and you can only from the photographs, from the still photographs we have, it's very clear that there was a lot of love put into this, and indeed, of course, Waris Hussein, famous for obviously kicking off the series with the direction of An Unearthly Child, helming most of this with a brief interlude by John Crockett. But yeah, so
from Miami Vice.
That's the one. That's the one. His theme blasting as he came into as he arrived on set for episode 4. But with respect to Waris Hussein, John Crockett, and indeed the designer whose work is perhaps most obviously rateable through the photographs that exist. Yeah, the serial's designer. With respect to them, there is a part of me that finds the romanticism of this being lost. I don't know whether we would lose something. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were serials in this period, particularly The Aztecs is one that really stands out as just being absolutely nailed on. But that was in the same environment, again and again, whereas they went from mountain landscape to desert scape to cities, staging posts, oasis, and I maybe it was all perfectly executed, but having it just in your mind's eye, it really is. It is richly evocative. Yeah. And so I did like this. Oh, the other major caveat, of course, is that there's quite a bit of yellow-face casting, obviously. Yeah. In this, although I would go. I would say that it actually avoids a lot of the racial stereotyping of, say, Talon Zaweng Chiang.
Yeah. I was going to make this point, so let's get this out the way at the top.
It plays it pretty much. I mean, like, I didn't find this problematic, apart from, obviously, the casting is not what you'd do today, but it doesn't, for me, raise the kind of racism flag in the way that Talon's does.
No. Well, look, no one's doing a funny accent, basically, is the point here. I mean, certainly that's what you get through on audio. There are accents there, but actually once you start, and when Wang Lo, the innkeeper, appeared, and that's a very big performance, I thought, oh God, where's this going? And then looking up, a Hungarian actor, and he's doing a big performance with his Hungarian accent. Kubla Khan is played by a Czech Austrian actor. I don't know to what extent this was deliberate, but it's a fairly international cast in terms of who is playing all the roles, and they are allowed to do it to their own native accents, which, yes, obviously if you were making this today, you would have an Asian cast playing all the roles, but no one is doing a fake Chinese accent, unlike in Talons.
It hasn't slipped into Fu Manchu territory at any point, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely not. And I think, looking at, from some of the visual material I've seen, yes, everyone is done up to look, sort of certainly, let's say, somewhat exotic. But again, it doesn't. To me, I think it just about gets away with it, with the sense that, you put it that Mark Eden as Marco Polo is not doing a Venetian accent, is he? Either. So it was a concern, and I think it just about gets away with it.
Oh no! What a caravan!
What a mistake to make.
I agree, and let's obviously also while we're discussing the casting, Zinnia Merton as Ping Cho.
Yes,
one of the more affecting performances in the entire piece. She's really good, sort of just so guileless and trusting, and generally a good egg, and everyone's delighted when her which is actually a great gag. The really old duffer who she's meant to marry drinks the elixir of life and promptly cops it. That's actually a hoot. But Ping Cho, it's to her credit that when that happens, you're so pleased for her, because she's been the most trusting of the sort of troupe in terms of accepting these incomers. And although Marco Polo is the name on the door, and he's portrayed, although this is the 13th century, he's portrayed as a kind of Renaissance man, even sort of some Enlightenment tendencies in terms of trying to work through who he believes and not accepting at face value absolutely everything that's put in front of him. It's actually Ping Cho who develops that friendship, particularly with Susan, who along with Barbara, sort of built. It's really those female characters that build a bond, and it's really Ping Cho that trusts the incomers the most, and of course is right to do so, and to distrust Tigana, and that's really what this entire serial, as epic as it is and as brilliant it is, the whole thing is a treatise on trust, and the whole thing is about trust and what you trust and how you gain trust and what you do with trust and how it is lost. When there's a point where Ian lies to cover something up, and he said it's not even what you're lying about, it's the fact that you can lie or have lied.
Yeah. That
Marco Polo finds difficult to sort of compute.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, it was sort of jumping ahead slightly, but I did make a note of that Marco, obviously the villain of this piece is Tigana, played by Darren Nesbitt. Brilliantly played by Darren Nesbitt. He's
terrific.
Absolutely phenomenal performance, I think. And it's a very, it's interesting to hear.
It's a very straight performance. Again, it's not mannered, or it's not.
Well, it's a very screen performance. It's not a theatre performance, which you get a lot of. In the early days of television, generally, you got a lot of actors doing for these sort of bit part roles. It's a very quiet. There's a quiet menace. It's absolutely gloriously suited to audio as well. It's wonderful to hear him purr with villainy all the way through. But no, although Tigana is the sort of nominal villain of the piece. Marco, I'm sort of coming around to it. This is basically Marco Polo's story, even down to the extent that he's the narrator of it. There are those narrative excerpts from his diary, so he is telling us the story, and it is the story of how on this journey some sort of interlopers with a flying caravan, as he puts it, came to join them, and it's not hard to see even though he's a thorn in the side of the TARDIS crew by taking the TARDIS and not trusting them and not believing them, etc., etc. it's not hard to see why he does what he does. In fact, he's very sympathetic in that regard, in that, yes, he does want to go home. That's very touching when he tells his story about how he wants to go home and he's not been able to. And you can understand why he would seize on that opportunity. And he's very fair. The basic thing is that he doesn't understand the science fiction element of the story. When he tells the Doctor that, I'll get you back to Venice and then you can build a new TARDIS in Venice, but I need to get out the country before the Khan dies and I'm killed by jealous Mongol soldiers, basically.
Yeah.
He has a hell of a predicament. He has a sensible solution, and he tries to be very fair to the Doctor.
Yes.
And that's what I find fascinating about
Which is
this.
more than he gets back from the Doctor, by the way.
Absolutely. The TARDIS crew are continually trying to double cross him, and ultimately, our sympathies do lie with them because, we do want them to get out and have another adventure. But they double bluff him with the extra key. Can you blame Marco for feeling betrayed by them? I don't. And
it's astonishing he keeps faith with them as much as he does in many ways.
Yeah. Well, but that's testament to the fact that I think, Mark Eden's very good. Darren Nesbitt
very
absolutely
good.
steals the show in this, but as a sort of, it's a very sort of straight, heroic performance that he gives as this sort of, dashing explorer. But he's really good, and he's kind of got the sort of heart and soul of it. But sorry, I talked massively over you on this. Sorry, you were making
no,
a point,
at all.
And then I butted in.
There are a couple of bits where Eden, in his portrayal of Marco Polo, there's a couple of bits where he shows frustration and even slips into anger. But he mostly gives the impression of being a leader, of being the person who, in a situation, takes that moment to pause, take a step back, consider the motivations of everybody who's there, and not rush to judgment. As you say, in many occasions, he's right to be as frustrated with the Doctor and his companions as he is, but he's never unfair.
No.
And I think that's it speaks well to him, and you immediately get a sense of why he's the leader of this expedition and so on. And I agree with you about Darren Nesbitt as Tagana. Just fabulous, and
phenomenal.
The booing that would have been hitting the television screens in 1964 when he reaches the oasis and doesn't go back for them. And
he pours the water onto the sand.
I know, what a bastard!
Absolute bastard!
What a shit!
So this is written by John Lucarotti, and it's interesting that, certainly for the first sort of half or whatever of this season, you've got this first season, you've got John Lucarotti and Terry Nation doing a bit of tag teaming. So obviously Terry Nation writes the Daleks, or the first Daleks.
I'm not sure I'd want to see that. No, I see what you mean. Sorry. Yeah.
Then obviously you got the Edge of Destruction, and then here's Lucarotti's debut with Marco Polo. Then you've got Terry Nation back for the Keys of Marinus, Far Future. Then you've got John Lucarotti back for the Aztecs. This is it's kind of, obviously the story, the whole series, Doctor Who, starts with a caveman story, but obviously, we will get to reviewing 100,000 BC, as I believe we're supposed to call it, in the fullness of time. But whilst that is a historical adventure, that also has a lot of setup to do in effectively establishing the format of the series. Whereas it's really interesting, you look at some of the early documentation and interviews with people involved in setting up Doctor Who in the first place, and one of the first ideas that they come on is that the Doctor and crew should join Marco Polo on his travels. William Hartnell has claimed that it was his idea, but that's been disputed by a few other people. But this was an idea that was on the drawing board right from the start, and so this is as close to you get as I think as an original vision of what historical Doctor Who will be like. And John Lucarotti is such a fantastic writer, and I think actually he nails on how to do history episodes in this first series better than has ever been done at any point since, I think, in terms of what the classic series or the modern series has done, because he's always got there's a basic simple concept sort of beating at the heart really of his historical stories. He's not doing, oh, I'm going to meet a famous person and we'll have a famous actor playing the famous person in the way that the modern series does.
Yeah.
There's no sort of propping it up with rogue sci-fi elements. But there's always a simple proposition at its heart. And it's like, obviously in the Aztecs, it's all about moral relativity, isn't it? Or moral relativism. What would it feel like for you with a 20th century value system to go back and witness human sacrifice in the Aztecs? And would you feel bound to do anything about it? And here, again, it's just a very basic question he's asking. What would it feel to be here in this situation? But he's also asking, what would the historical characters feel to have this situation thrust on them? And like I say,
Yes.
it's Marco's story, and the TARDIS crew are in it.
What I find is so interesting about that, Matt, is that there are various points where more than once the Doctor accuses those around him of being savages. There's one point where he says, "You poor, pathetic, stupid savage."
Yeah.
He's very judgmental about these people because they're from the past. And
you
the
wince a
beautiful
bit when you
irony
hear him say that.
Sorry?
You wince a bit when you hear him
Yeah,
say
no,
that.
you do,
don't
you do. Yeah, no, and the thing I find funny about this is that, funny. It's absolutely intended by Luca Rotti that they're far from savages. That they've been treated with real dignity, and even when they've been working against their captor, but also their host. There is no sign of savagery. There's a lack of understanding, but even Marco Polo, really near the beginning, says, "Oh, I've seen Buddhist monks take a cup of something and it flies through the air to the emperor's lips. So, I could pretty much believe anything if I can see it with my own eyes." It's sort of come to a very broad view of what is and what is not possible, and a sort of just an open-minded view of things, which is probably anachronistic, right? But nonetheless it forces you to go, well, these were people too. They had motivations too. They thought about things too. Several of them could have surprised you, just like people now. It does put you in the position of thinking about these people not just as historical celebrities, but as people.
And, obviously, in terms of what Luca Rotti's bringing to the table to this, he had previously written, I believe, a very, very long BBC radio drama about the travels of Marco Polo. So he was very much in this guy's head, and that's what really comes across, is that it's incredibly nuanced and thought out. He's absolutely in that situation. And to be honest, he's probably in that situation more than he is in the Doctor Who situation, because that's all brand new. These characters haven't been established. They are still sort of working out what this setup is, and the formula hasn't taken place yet. So this is a point I keep making. I'll stop making it so I don't get too repetitious. But this is a Marco Polo story that has some time travelers inserted into it, and it's very elegantly done. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think this is absolutely fantastic. I think it's exciting. I think it's tight. I think it. I think the pace sort of slackens off a bit. I mean, it's 7 episodes long, and realistically, I would probably have preferred maybe 5 or something. I think of this. Didn't need to be massively cut down. Certainly not down to the 30-minute telesnap version, which you can see on the Edge of Destruction DVD, which I've not watched.
I was really shocked doing my absolutely rudimentary research to see.
Well, your eyes lit up when I said there's a 30-minute version, and you were like, "Oh, great, I'll do that." But actually, I mean, we can go and watch it after this. It can't be any good, really, can it?
No, right? It can't be at all.
But I mean, the pace slackens off a bit from about episode 4 onwards, and it does become a little repetitious, but. It's really, really good, this, and it takes nothing for granted. It's written, I think, beautifully in places. I think there's beautiful lyrical stuff, like you say, all the bits where Marco is explaining how his open mind by explaining some of the amazing things that he's seen on his travels. I mean, I love the scene where he says, in one town I saw a stone that could burn. And then Ian says, "Yeah, coal." But it's like, again, it's just little things like that really just get you into the mindset of a time when the world was being explored and all of this was completely new.
And although Luca Rotti deserves, of course, a huge amount of credit for writing this stuff, and I was sort of saying about how, whereas Hussein, we don't really get to see much of his work, but it seems that it was very much, well, he had two key sort of contributions. First being apparently that he was the one who had clocked Eden in an RSC production and sort of brought him to the table. But the other thing was that the narration apparently was originally scripted for to be read by the regular cast, and it was Hussein's decision to put it in the words of Polo, which I'm sure would have been. I can imagine Luca Rotti thinking, I've just done this series about Marco Polo. I thought I'd mix it up a bit and not rehash by putting it in, in these people's words. No. What this needs to be is Marco Polo. Yeah. Oh, okay. Right, but yeah, it's a great decision, and it it's called Marco Polo, as I say. His name's on the door, and it just brings you that bit closer to him. I really want to talk about Hartnell and the Doctor. His performance. We kind of mentioned that he was very, very crotchety, very unnerved, and he starts off basically with altitude sickness. So he's particularly hysterical, and they talk about him having mountain sickness, which I guess is altitude sickness, and he's sort of hysterical and chuckling and things, and that it takes a long time for that to wear off. Of course, Hartnell was actually ill during the production, so that's why he's largely absent for episode 2. But he was sort of written as being quite kind of crazed and disturbed, and that's where these outbursts seem to come from. He isn't the settled avuncular figure who's trying to connect youth with experience by say the War Machines, where where he's going down into go-go bars and all sorts like that. He's a distrustful and flighty figure. He's quite keen to get rid of Ian and Barbara. I did like Carol Ann Ford's quotation from the recording of Marco Polo. She's apparently said, "It was a nasty little thing peeing all over the place and biting anyone who came near it." Not William Hartnell, though, a monkey that was apparently in the 5th episode, and alas, we don't see it. But yeah, interesting that the Doctor's not a fully formed, lovable character at this point.
No, not at all. And also one of an ensemble cast. I mean, as you say, the show is called Doctor Who. He is ostensibly the lead character, but even at this stage, he can be absent for whole episodes at a time, and he gets, I would say, as much screen time and as much agency as certainly Ian and Susan. I think. I mean, Barbara is in more of a sort of commentary role here, perhaps, than kind of driving a story herself. I mean, she's still brilliant, and like Jacqueline Hill is just fantastic. But whereas Ian's sparring with Marco Polo, and then Susan's relationship with Ping Cho kind of get their own kind of things. Barbara's sort of in the background a little bit. But it's very much not. They are driving the story and making decisions, and it's absolutely not that the supporting characters are there just to sort of defer to the Doctor. And the Doctor's got his own agenda, and he's not always right. I mean, that said, I do also think that it's just a wonderful twist about having built up for so long how they're going to see the mighty Kubla Khan. By the time they get to see him in episode 6, he's pretty decrepit and ends up immediately bonding with the Doctor over the aches and pains of old age, which funny, is and it plays to Hartnell's strengths doing comedy. I think largely a comic actor prior to doing Doctor Who. Their interplay is absolutely fantastic, and I love if you think that even later classic series Doctors, let alone the more messianic modern series Doctors, the idea of a game of backgammon to win back the TARDIS would be an epic battle that you would expect the Doctor to come out on top of at the last minute. But the fact that you see them playing the game And then the next scene is the Doctor wandering out, and he says, "Well, he gave me a consolation prize." Which is it's just really, really funny and really nicely done. You know, he's not.
It is.
He's not the domineering character in charge of the situation.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I did like the trying to remember the actor's name who played the Emperor. But Martin Miller, Czech Austrian character actor. Yeah, that's right. But he was terrific. I particularly liked his relationship not only with the Doctor but also with the Empress. It was a very much kind of, it felt like a relationship of equals. They'd been round the block. They knew how to kind of tease each other and to lean into each other's weaknesses and just make a little joke at each other's expense. I really liked this. I thought that the dangers and the thrills and the kind of big adventure stylings of it were fantastic. And I really come back again to this thing that you get a bit of history, you get a bit of sense of place and the epic scale of whether, when you think about going from the Himalaya through down the Silk Road and so on and so forth, it's on an epic scale. But really, despite that epic scale, despite that history, it is a story about trust and what it is like to be thrown into a new environment, and how even good people who are fair-minded, as Marco Polo is, can end up making completely the wrong decision in terms of who they trust, and because he puts a lot of trust really until quite late in the day into Tegana, and it's only quite late in the day that he listens to our mob and Ping Cho, and realizes the treachery at the heart of Tegana's actions, and that story about trust is central to what this is about. So, amidst the epic nature of what's on screen, it's actually quite a small and intimate story about people.
One question I was going to ask, and I mean, you're no older than me, so you may not be in a position to answer this, but is this a period...
I'm definitely not older than you.
No, actually, you're a couple of months younger than me. But is this a period of history that would have been familiar to a school-age audience at the time? Because I recall my history education at school, and it was basically Tudors, Stuarts and Nazis with a little bit of medieval crop rotation.
And some Russian communists.
And some Russian communists. Yeah, you might, if you got a particularly progressive teacher, you might get to the late 70s, early 80s. But, the fact that it seems to have been on the table from day one of being, it certainly doesn't seem to be that everyone was immediately saying, well, the Doctor's got to meet Shakespeare and Julius Caesar. Like, the fact that in all of these early meetings, Marco Polo is the name that's being brought up. It's genuinely an open question, and maybe either someone in the chat tonight or someone could write in afterwards and let us know. But
yeah, so there is a very, very famous Ladybird book, the story of Marco Polo, which was published in 1962.
Right.
It's. I mean, I don't know for sure that was the spur behind it, but if you were doing a children's historical serial, certainly the Ladybird.
That's where you take your lead.
Yeah, I mean they were extraordinarily popular, and obviously this one came out in 1962. So you can imagine that a great many children would have had this wonderful book, which has got a beautiful cover of a golden palace and Marco Polo there in a red kind of oriental robe, and yeah, it's I can well imagine that would have been part and parcel of maybe you can even imagine maybe Verity Lambert getting some children's history books in and thinking right, okay guys,
doling
and then
them
they
out.
think, well, there's this guy Lucarotti, he actually did a series about, so I'd be very surprised if the Ladybird book hadn't been part of that thinking.
Yeah, I just, I had no idea really, but it was just more that, I mean, I'm extremely unfamiliar with this period. I mean, I know that there's been a couple of Netflix series about Marco Polo dramas that have been done recently. But what I would now say the working total of my knowledge of this whole period has probably now come from Doctor Who. But so it's educative. It's deeply educative, but I was wondering to what extent a school-age audience watching this at the time would have necessarily been sort of sucked into it, or would there have been a bit of a kind of I've been given some homework basically, versus we had the Daleks a few weeks earlier.
It would be interesting to know whether the sales of that Ladybird book then went up during the 7-week run of this.
And according to the sort of footnotes of the Wikipedia article, there was interest in the BBC was approached by Disney, who were interested in buying the rights to make a movie version of this story, which nothing came to pass. But there was that, and there was interest at the time in doing a comics adaptation as well. So it was clearly this, and also it was a massive.
I do like the idea of David Tomlinson playing the Doctor. I mean, that's pretty.
Oh well, maybe we'll do a bonus episode on what Disney Doctor Who would look like. I'm sure we could have some fun with that.
Perhaps we should. I did want to say just one thing, because in the chat, Gwem said, "I'm not sure John got away with that Venetian accent." He seems to have been rather dismayed by my Dolmio stylings. But on that subject, and given this is live, and so I can make this very highly contemporary and date stamp it terribly, anyone who can at the moment watch the latest series of Inside Number 9, the first episode of Series 6, Wuthering Heist, is worth watching for Reece Shearsmith's comedy Italian accent by itself. So I can definitely throw a shout out there.
To that. But I guess just to bring it sort of back round to one of the the sort of opening point really that we were making about the fact that we could do a sort of watch along with the telly snaps of this at some point, but I've definitely just heard it on audio. It's one of the things I love about this period of Doctor Who is just the sound of it. I mean, the sound is just wonderful, like real intense, complex, very avant-garde sort of ambient electronic sound design that's being used.
A word on Tristram Carey?
I mean, Tristram Carey's score is magnificent in this. I mean, he's like a legit composer as well. So, I'd love to hear a proper... I don't know if I presume the master recordings of this aren't available anymore and you can't listen to it. But no, I mean, beautiful use of like sort of Chinese instruments alongside the more sort of traditional sort of drums and brass. But I'm also just thinking of the night in the desert, the sort of small bits of sound design that are done to really capture the stillness and atmosphere of that. It sounds. I mean, just on audio, and I was listening to it, walking the dog around East London, but on audio, it's unbelievably evocative. And then when the singing sandstorm arrives, and Marco's talking about all of the different things different people have heard in the swirling sandstorm, and you listen to it, and you can hear all of those sounds in the mix. I mean, it is a radiophonic tour de force of like screams and insects and whooshing, traditional wind noises. I mean, the sound of the thing is absolutely phenomenal. And so, it sort of brings me back to your sort of, I think perhaps slight ambivalence about the sort of prospect of like what would happen if this was ever rediscovered. Because, as you say, from the photos, it looks absolutely badass, in terms of like the costumes and the design and the set. But I can also say that it would scare me a bit if 7 episodes of this turned up, because I absolutely loved this. I thought this was top drawer. I thought this was so atmospheric, and it would break my heart if it looked like shit.
Hi everyone, Matt Watson here. So I've been living in a van. You see, I've been to visit my mother, but because of COVID-19 and social distancing, I can't go into a house. So I've been sleeping in this on a driveway, which is actually on a ring road. But this isn't just any van, it's a Mercedes Marco Polo. It's a luxurious motorhome. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything about it and show off all its really cool features.
If anyone wants to see the full review of the Marco Polo van, there's a
link in the show notes.
It's just a short clip from a 20-minute review of its full features. But there you go. It's perfect if you have to live in a van thanks to COVID. Anyway, I just deeply enjoyed watching John's reaction to that over the Zoom. It was terrific. So what are we doing next? The Rings of Akhaten. Taking it forward to 2013 for our second story tonight. The second half of Series 7, Matt Smith's final series in the role. Second story.
Oh.
Yeah, what a shame. It's quite harsh.
Sorry,
I mean, we will talk about Matt Smith's performance in this. So the second half of Series 7, second story second proper story with Jenna Coleman playing Clara, the Doctor's new assistant. And what happens in the Rings of Akhaten? Well, she is keen to see something quote-unquote awesome for her first trip into time and space. And so the Doctor takes her to see the Rings of Akhaten, which is basically the cantina scene from Star Wars with a shiny gold pyramid and a god that lives in a sun, and they are there for... It's
basically the Star Wars cantina meets the Canterbury Tales.
Okay, I was breaking down slightly in my terms because I didn't prepare any notes to actually describe the plot of the Rings of Akhaten. So you could... Thanks for stepping in and saving me there.
Well, I mean, I don't mean the whole thing, but that scene, it's basically kind of pilgrims... A sort of pilgrimage marketplace. It's got a kind of Canterbury Tales, I guess, feel to it. The Star Wars cantina thing is like, I made a big note of that.
Yeah.
It's pretty much there. So there's a child monk. What's that thing with Eddie Murphy about the little prince? It's not called.
Oh, the Golden Child.
The Golden Child. Yeah, there's a Golden Child, basically, isn't there? And the Golden Child is... she has to sing at the sun, or it will go nuts.
Basically. And the... This is really falling apart. I was trying to explain the plot of this. So yeah, there's a child who has to sing to the god who lives in the sun, and it goes wrong, and she is drawn into the pyramid, I guess.
Yeah, because Clara selfishly says, "Listen, love, do what you like."
Yeah,
and the kid, "Oh, I will then," and then puts everybody in danger.
Yeah. So they go into the pyramid, and there's a sort of
all she had to do was sing a little song.
There's a vampire energy creature in there who they think is the god, but actually it's just the gateway to the sun, who feeds off...
The creature is the gateway.
The creature's the gatekeeper, I think.
Right. Sleep on the job.
Possibly prejudicing our opinions of this story. Well, I don't know, John, you may surprise me. But... the Doctor basically causes the sun to go supernova by telling the sun stories of his own pain, and then Clara hands over a leaf that was the leaf that blew in her father's face.
It's no advert for therapy, this, is it?
It really isn't. Look, you've probably seen this already, so we probably don't need to spend any more time explaining to you what happens in the Rings of Akhaten. John, as if I need to ask, did you like this?
No.
Okay. Fine. So next tonight we're looking at.
But I didn't hate it as much as I remembered. I've got to say.
Well, I had. That's the thing. I saw this when it went out, and I had no memory of it whatsoever. I mean, I definitely watched it because I definitely remembered seeing an episode where Matt Smith shouts at the sun, and that was the only thing I remembered from it. But I watched it last night, and it was all. I mean, I may as well have been watching it with fresh eyes. Well, I was, basically. Just nothing had stayed at all.
So, there's... I mean, my insofar as I understand that this is not a universally loved episode, right? No. I get the impression that most people think it's a bit of a stinker. I must confess that even as somebody who really dislikes this particular era of the show, by which I mean the Matt Smith Doctor in particular. I didn't hate this.
Okay.
And it largely because I felt that there were some things in it that made me think quite favourably about some aspects of this era of the show versus the current run, the Chibnall run. Most of all, the Doctor Who at this point, I'll go through all the reasons I don't like it, don't you worry. But at this point, Doctor Who is still interested in wonder, right? In hopefulness. I'm going to show you something, show me something awesome. Take me somewhere awesome, right? That's what Clara says.
Yeah.
And he takes us to this place, and yes, okay, it's a complete rip-off of the Star Wars Cantina, but it's got all these different faces and people.
It's not a bad rip-off of the Cantina.
No, it's fun, right? And credit to Jenna Coleman. She looks awed by it all. Like, she acts that quite well about being surrounded by all this stuff and being awed by it all, and finding it fascinating and kind of terrifying and new. And the Doctor is is excited to be showing her this new stuff, and there's just a sense of hope and wonder, which I feel, although it's really only in that one scene, and a bit with the fact that she tries to win the confidence of the child, that sense of wonder and of hope is something that I feel very personally is so central to what Doctor Who is.
Yeah.
And there are many times when that has been absent in various runs in the show, particularly in the 80s, particularly during Chibnall's run, I have to say. And that is present and correct. So many things I didn't like, which I shall go through, but I did like the tone of it, at least. The tone, it feels like Doctor Who, right? Okay. It feels like Doctor Who. What I don't like about it are basically the things that where Moffat's being clever. So the whole thing with the backstory, with how her parents meet, which gives the leaf its importance, and therefore the leaf can be, this isn't
written by Stephen Moffat. We should hasten to add.
No, that's very true. It's written by Neil Cross.
Showrunner Neil Cross. Yes.
Yes, Luther creator and showrunner Neil Cross. Probably was very cross by the time Moffat finished with his script. But no, you can't deny that it's Moffat's.
It's the house style at this point.
No, it starts with the 11th Doctor creepily, basically stalking Clara and her family.
Another young woman.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And he's encountered her twice now in Victorian London and in the Asylum of the Daleks.
Yep.
And so he's trying to kind of figure her out. And what is trying to be done here with the backstory with her parents and the importance that's placed in this leaf and whatever that's all about, is to say that no, she isn't just. And in fact, it's explicitly said at various points. I'm not just a problem, or I'm a person.
Mm.
And I just don't feel that. Well, she just doesn't land as a person. I don't believe in Clara Oswald. I just don't believe in her. I don't see a person. I see a sassy lady,
Perky.
Sassy young woman, typical construct. She's a bit of a Doctor proxy.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think it really lands. I don't feel for her. I don't feel in my bones that she's real. Gotta say, I don't feel in my bones that the Doctor is real in this either.
No.
They're both. I mean, there's a bit where where they're both shouting at the sun. It's often talked about like he shouts at the sun, he shouts at the sun, and then she shouts at the sun.
Yes.
He has a declamatory monologue, not too dissimilar, I suppose, in tone from the one that I'm giving you all right now. And then Clara does the same thing and does speaks at a tennis ball on a stick, presumably. It's far from being the kind of fluid, engaged, human feeling interactions that we saw through 7 episodes of Marco Polo, which would damn well have dragged if there hadn't been decent dialogue and great performances.
Jesus,
And it just feels like the performances are so phoned in. It's like, oh yeah, give the Doctor a speech. No, we don't. Well, he talks in sound bites. You don't walk away. You don't do this. You do that. It's just full of this kind of said no. It's like it's clever, like Sayward. It reminds me of Sayward. It's like it falls into that said no one ever category of
banter.
writing.
Yeah,
and I find it enraging, and I just don't believe in either the Doctor or Clara. They're not. The whole thing. Moff's whole thing is about the deconstruction of narrative, and what he's meant to be doing, what this episode is meant to do. Neil Cross's brief is make Clara a real person, so that although all this stuff is swirling around them, what's really this is about is the person and the humanity and the feelings. And it just it isn't. It doesn't land. It doesn't achieve any intimate level of script writing where the dialogue actually lands any of that, because it's so arch so much all the time.
I agree. I think this is terrible. So I guess my main overarching. I basically agree with everything you've said. I'd go a bit further on a couple of points.
Oh, please do.
My main sort of top line why I don't like this is that I think it's just all utterly unearned. So it's going for this.
I think that's basically what
it's going for this completely grandiose, tug the heartstrings. At the end where this little girl's predicament and this planet, I suppose, this sort of planet enslavement. And the Doctor, the pain of the Doctor's eternal existence and Clara's, tragic backstory are all meant to come together in this, and the choirs sing out, and Murray Gold turns the Murray Goldizer up to 11, and and everything gets bigger and bigger, and the CGI is going off, and to me, it feels so cynically confected to get to that point without any real investment either in Clara's story, in the situation. It's a sort of tug the heartstrings, wipe away a tear number that sort of emptily and lazily tries to walk you to that point. It's also going for epic, and we know the modern Doctor Who can do epic, it can do visual epic. It's very well resourced, but it's Doctor Who has not put as much faith in green screen as it does here since, I reckon, Terror of the Autons, because there is some, for modern TV, shocking compositing here of just, it's clearly all been done in a room against a curtain, and sort of put together in a computer. So
what is that sun meant to be?
I don't really know. So, but it sort of feels, even though it's meant to have this epic grandeur sweep, it actually feels quite airless and sort of indoors. It doesn't. You absolutely don't feel that the Doctor at the end is a man screaming into eternity as the sun goes supernova. It's as you rightly say. Presumably, she's the two of them are just shouting at a tennis ball on a stick. So overall, that's it. It's something that is aiming and trying to confect some sort of emotional response, but it's just lazily and emptily, like it's not there. I would say, I agree with everything about Clara. I guess where I depart from you slightly is I think Clara works much better in the Capaldi era, where basically, to all intents and purposes, I think Jenna Coleman is playing a completely different character who also seems to be called Clara, where there does at least seem to be some attempt to build out a kind of credible backstory and emotional modus operandi for her. Whereas here she is very much, she's perky, she's sassy, she's very much a man's idea of a strong woman, which is always a very risky route to go down. I think Jenna Coleman is a good actress, and I think she's likable in this, where Clara comes across as likable. It's because Jenna Coleman's putting putting in a bit of a shift in order to get it across the line. But you definitely don't feel, oh, she's going to shake things up. This is something new. Matt Smith is dreadful in this, and it absolutely feels like, and I think in this season, possibly both sides of the divide in this season, because it was a season of two halves, where you do just sort of get the sense that he's run out of things to do with the Doctor. It's almost like, I don't mean to say this in a way that suggests I'm putting some personal criticism at him, but I think he can't do anything with this material, and I think he's lost interest in it. It's interesting. I bought for the first time in God knows how many years. I bought a copy of Doctor Who magazine recently, and there's an interview with Stephen Moffat in it, who's mainly talking about writing for Christopher Eccleston. But he mentioned sort of in passing that for the first year of Matt Smith as the Doctor, apparently Matt Smith would go home and lie awake all night, slamming his head against his pillow, saying, "I can do this, I can do this, I can do this," because he was so terrified at what he felt he was doing. And Matt Smith is, I don't particularly like season 5, but Matt Smith is brilliant in that, and he's the best that he is as the Doctor there. Where there's certainly a bit of sort of nervous energy, and there's something going on there. Here, I mean, the costume that they seem to have got him into at this point is just dreadful. I mean, it's a cosplay version of sort of faux eccentric Victoriana.
It's truly up there with the Sixth Doctor as probably one of the worst costumes.
It's weird for being significantly more muted than the Sixth Doctor, but it's a dreadful outfit they've got him in. That does just absolutely scream. It's what. It's what if they'd made the series in the 90s with, Paul Daniels in the lead role and Debbie McGee as his assistant. Well, as all the tabloid rumours were. No one was ever seriously.
Was that something they talked about at the time?
No one talked about that. But it was always like, it was going to be Paul Daniels one week and David Hasselhoff the next week. That was always the thing that everyone said.
I see what you mean.
When they cast, when they actually cast Paul McGann in the role, everyone was like, oh, they've got an actual actor. In the tabloid
composite, that's what he looked like.
That's it. Thank you. That's a much more succinct way of doing it. That's totally what he would look like. And, he's all just mannerisms and forced eccentricity. And, someone he's obviously sort of taken on board this idea that I think he, the lightning in a bottle that he catches in Series 5 is being an old soul, being a very young man, in his late 20s at this point when he's playing the role, who does seem to have lived a life. And that is, even feeling when I think 2009 when they unveiled him in the role and he did that first interview, and you thought, oh, there's actually something really interesting and unusual about this guy.
Yeah.
Here you get none of that, and there's absolutely nothing for him to actually work with in this script. But he, it's stock mannerisms, it's forced eccentricity, it's a little bit of Victoriana, it's like a young man playing old. I think his performance is dreadful, and so I don't believe in the setting particularly. Clara, as we say, has got there's not really much going on there, and it's the Doctor at his I think at his most paper thin, full of jokey without being funny, the worst thing ever that drama can do, I think.
Right.
Either do actual jokes that are funny or don't. And yeah, actually, not sure if I really have much more to say on it other than that. But it's just, I think this is just so nothing. And I think sort of really points to the fact that, the Matt Smith era is so all over the place, and it kind of, it suffers to an extent to which, like with every season, Moffat sort of does a handbrake turn into doing something completely different. So Series 5 is, largely sticks to the Davis structure, but with, more sort of dark fairy tale kind of overtones, and, is I think by common consent, Matt Smith's best season. The next season is, an incredibly knotty, epic, everything knitted together, incredibly complex, which can be both incredibly dissatisfying on an episode per episode basis, but also if you're not watching arc episodes, those episodes just feel insignificant as well. So it's sort of none of that really works. And then when you get to series 7, where, you know, everything is, apart from the sort of, you know, Impossible Girl kind of overlay on it, everything is designed to be reasonably standalone. But, you know, I think obviously there was a bit of a torrid production situation by all accounts during the production of this bit of the season. But everyone's focus, I think, is on delivering the 50th anniversary special a few months further down the line. There's just a bunch of just utterly nothing episodes that are just running on the spot. I mean, I think this is, well, until you get to the Chibnall era, I think this is as close as modern Doctor Who comes to just like, oh, we've got to slap out a bunch of episodes because otherwise they won't have anything to put on Saturday nights.
I mean, this comes hot on the heels of the Bells of St. John, which I, to all intents and purposes, recall is much of a muchness in terms of not really touching the sides. No, I did dislike hugely the attempt at emotional manipulation here. As you say, you're meant to, because I would, even when you were talking through like, oh, and it's meant to be this big thing and this big story, and there's Clara and there's the Doctor and they're shouting, I could even hear Moffat's voice saying, you know, and there's all this and there's all that, but at the end of the day, it's actually a really simple story about a kind young woman, and how her actions are, and it's like you don't get that past just because you think you're doing something slightly interesting by subverting our expectations. Like, you think this is going to be about this naughty Impossible Girl thing, and actually it's just about how this nice kind young woman helps this kid and solves the problems of a planet by discussing the possibilities of the future. It's like, well, yeah, sure, but for me to care, I need to know who this person is. I need to hear them speak in English sentences that people would actually say. I need to get a feel for what makes her laugh or what makes her fearful or whatever. And she is just a cipher. She is just a device. And that's not a criticism of Jenna Coleman. There's just nothing there. By contrast, you know, I do completely agree with your criticism of Matt Smith's performance. I mean, the speech is it's that thing of being so overpowered. You know, I've watched planets burn and all that bollocks, and it you know, it's a forceful performance, but there's no heart in it at all.
No,
there's nothing behind the eyes. You don't feel that he believes that or that it makes any difference. It's extraordinary. And I
also, he's had some
well,
laughs along the way, hasn't he?
I dislike as well the you know, for a story that it brings religion to the table, but it doesn't do anything with it. And I'm not suggesting that it. I'm just saying that such an emotionally manipulative story that aims to pull your heartstrings because of sacrifice and everything, it just seems a bit odd, a bit glib. You know, religion is a big subject, very, very worthy of discussion on Doctor Who. But to just sort of plonk it in there, and sort of, I just don't know what we're meant to make of the actual. Okay, so it's a story about the kindness of the young, blah blah. What actually is this religion? What is that sun thing? What is going wrong here? What actually has gone wrong here? There's a sun that eats emotions, and it's like, okay, I mean, I get that this is from the same stable that brought you. If you can remember the Doctor, then he can come back, and I get that there's an obsession with storytelling and how, you know, it's not the. You're almost forced to confront at every stage that these aren't real they're characters playing out dramas. They're not real people. But the in-world universe stuff doesn't.
Well, I mean, if nothing else, there are so many references to stories and telling stories and feeding on stories and owning your stories. In this,
you're beaten over the head with the subtext, aren't you?
In this episode. I mean, I just remember thinking I'd quite like a story now if that's not too much to ask for. I mean, it's like, I
think that's again you've summed it up nicely. For you know, when the whole thing is a when the whole thing is a big ball of metabolics about story, and then you dig deep into it and there is no story there, then really what is this for?
Just a couple of shout outs to the chat at this point. So Tom Turlow has got a couple of comments on this. So first of all, he's asked what actually went on behind the scenes during this era. I'm constantly hearing mutterings about off-camera stuff, but no one ever says what actually happened. I genuinely don't know particularly what happened. I mean, all that is known is that Caroline Skinner, the executive producer of this series, left at pretty short notice just before they were due to start filming the 50th anniversary special. There was various speculation on what might have led to that in publications including Private Eye, but as they can afford very expensive libel lawyers and we can't, I'll refer you to two copies of Private Eye for that. But to be honest, like, no one has ever sort of explicitly said what happened, but it sounds chaotic, to be honest. But Tom has also said, unlike our hosts, I'm a big fan of Moffat and the Matt Smith era, but I remember virtually nothing about this story, which I think is we're chalking this one up as unmemorable, I think. So
I'm hoping soon to remember nothing about this story.
I'm sure, give it a couple of hours. We can always listen back to this and remind ourselves what we thought about this. And then Lewis has said, I missed some of the discussion, but I dislike this story because of what John calls the emotional manipulation. It's cloyingly sentimental, not an uncommon fault in this period. And I think that's it. I mean, and let's be honest. I mean, obviously we've gone slightly back into Moffat bashing mode here tonight. This is something that Davis
feels good though, right? Feels good.
Feels like we're back in the game, boys. This is something that Davis is prone to as well. I mean, in effect, there's this idea of some sort of we'll take a rationalist view of the world but allow for a faith-based solution, which is obviously the wrap up to season 3 and Last of the Time Lords as well, which I also think I think that is actually rolling around on the rotation. We keep promising this. I think we will be talking about Last of the Time Lords pretty soon, not long now. But that is, I think, a similarly largely unearned ending. But at least in a Russell T Davies episode, you get Russell T Davies-y bits where there are like some good dialogue and good scenes, and it's reasonably exciting. It's like if you in some ways the sentimentality of this episode, I think, is a sort of bad Davies tribute act to an extent, in that it's sort of it's some of his worst sentimentality without any of the stuff.
Davis would exactly right, Matt. And unearned, I think, is the big thing here. I agree. Last of the Time Lords is a steaming pile of ordure, but that aside, in general, through his run, you would earn some. I don't mind sentimentality, but it has to be earned, and it's never earned here. Russell T Davies would give you the permission to care about these characters by writing even half a line of dialogue that would give you something. Like, he'd have a character who looks a bit doomed, who's probably going to die, and he'd throw them a line saying, I always thought I'd get to see the Arctic monkeys live, or something, right? You'd get something that would kind of give you a kind of glimpse. And he's better than that, so it would be a better line. But you'd get something that would kind of give a sense of what the internal monologue of this person is, what makes them tick, what makes them laugh, what engages them. And I just don't think that this era does that consistently at all. And it's why so many people like me, many people love it, but many people like me bump against the meta knitting. Because if that's there and the character stuff isn't, then all the clever stuff can't save the fact that you don't care about the people on screen.
But the most compelling thing, I think, about the episode is this wonderful performance from Matt Smith. He has to offer up the Doctor's own memories to this slumbering god. And he does so in a tour de force performance, which is a volcanic eruption of emotion, which once seen will never be forgotten. So please enjoy The Rings of Akhaten.
So it's a counterpoint there from Peter Capaldi. Thanks for stopping by,
Who
Peter,
is that hack?
and giving us your views. Obviously, it's nice to get a dissenting voice on the podcast once in a while. Yeah, God, imagine being
Piss
told.
off, Pete.
Imagine being told for a repeat season that you had to do a special introduction to the Rings of Akhaten. I think that would challenge. Well,
I'd have lent into.
that's why
I'd
he's
have
one
lent
of the
into-
nation's best loved actors. Let's put it that way.
I would have definitely lent more into the fact that the kid, played by Amelia Jones, is Allard Jones's daughter.
Really?
Piece of factimation for you there.
Wow. Well, obviously the singing runs in the family then, doesn't it? That's
Well, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
This shit writes itself, as I'm sure. Anyway, but that's
Okay. One more. Speaking
on.
of which, one more story to review tonight. We are heading back to 1988. 1963 via 1988 for Remembrance of the Daleks. So this is the opening story to Sylvester McCoy's second season. The opening story of the 25th anniversary season. So you get a few nods to the past here. Little tip of the hat. A few, yeah. Little tip of the hat to the fans. And in this story, the Doctor and his new companion Ace arrive on Earth in 1963. The Doctor seems quite preoccupied. He's there on business. And it soon transpires that he is picking up where he left off last time he was in London, 1963, when we first encountered the Doctor at the beginning of the very first series. And it reveals that while he was there, he was dropping off the Hand of Omega, an ancient Gallifreyan weapon, which is now which he's now redeploying in a very drawn-out scheme to finally get rid of the Daleks once and for all. What he hasn't banked on is that a second set of Daleks is also turning up on Earth looking for the Hand of Omega, and these two sets of Daleks are not that keen on each other. Big shootout ensues. The Doctor falls in with a military group, and the Daleks fall in with a local fascist organisation called the Association, led by George Ratcliffe, builder's merchant George Ratcliffe, as played by the fantastic George Sewell. Always lovely to see him. This is first of two scripts contributed by Ben Aronovich, best known, well, probably as a Doctor Who writer for many years until, in more recent years had considerable best-selling success with his Rivers of London book series, but this was his first ever TV script, commonly regarded as something of a classic, both in terms of 80s Doctor Who and the Pantheon of Dalek stories, but if anyone is very capable of taking a good dump on well-loved stories from the 80s, it is I'll Explain Later. And so, John, it is my solemn duty to ask you, what did you think of Remembrance of the Daleks?
So I will take some of the dramatic tension out of this by saying I really enjoyed watching this. It is just such a joy from start to finish. There's explosions and soldiers, and the Doctor makes machines and rewires things and is genuinely the protagonist, and it's nice to have him to be the protagonist up against some bug-eyed monsters, and they blast countless Dalek casings, and writhing bits of rubbery flobber come flopping out of them.
I'm
and
sure
there's
even the
goo
new
everywhere.
series wouldn't blow up this many Dalek props, like physically blow them up.
I know. And Ace bashes them with a magic baseball bat, and the Dalek goes up the stairs, and there's Simon Williams, who's amazing as
he's
Group
brilliant.
Captain Gilmore. He's just so bloody good, And George Sewell, who plays this awful low rent fascist, just ghastly. He's got so little to do
Just
in the
a
script.
miserable little man, isn't he?
Yeah, he's right. I don't think anyone's suggesting Lupton is a racist, but he's in that kind of Lupton, just sad.
a
No, but he's
pathetic
evil,
man.
this guy.
Yes.
He's much worse than Lupton, but he's so... But I think Sewell, with very little in the script to do with it, really actually gives a great performance here. Just this horrid little man. Just horrid. Evil. with such ludicrous pretensions, practicing his speech that he'd give if he took over the country.
Yeah, he's gonna lead fascist Britain, isn't he?
It's so, and this isn't difficult to this isn't difficult to get to the kind of political subtext in terms of, what could be more fascist than two fascist groups finding minuscule differences between themselves, because such is the claim for purity that the lust for violence could never be satisfied, and the tramping of different ways of looking, different ways of thinking. Obviously, that's reflected very much in the 1963 that they find themselves in. An unearthly child does not begin with a series of evocative speeches that seem to be telling you about the best of the period. When it reminds me a lot of the opening of Independence Day, when the ship looms over and they have that, we came in peace for all mankind. Yeah. And as the ship flies in at the beginning of Remembrance of the Daleks, it's kind of like,
Which, to be honest, having a pre-titles is rare. I think it only happens a couple of times in classic Doctor Who as well.
And it's well shot as well.
Feels epic.
I think it's really epic, very well shot. And you've got those speeches, you've got JFK, you've got Martin Luther King. And it kind of sets it up like, oh my God, the Daleks are about to disturb this golden era of the explosion of civil rights and hope through the Camelot of JFK's court. And actually, it was not that. It's that the Daleks arrive, and actually Britain in the 60s is kind of not that great. I mean,
it's
certainly
pretty grotty, isn't it?
It's grotty. It's not swinging. It's racist.
Yeah.
No, far from. And, you can say, lots of people say the 60s didn't begin till 1963, so you can make that argument. But essentially what it's saying is, well, there's this kind of sanitized version, and we've brought the Daleks along to come along and destroy that. Yeah. Because actually you need to see what it was like with, no blacks, no Irish up in the windows of doss houses. And I love as well that, some of the dialogue is too arch. Like it's very, I guess it's sort of
has the old air of first script, doesn't it? In places,
yeah, there is. And I'm trying to remember the name of the actor who plays the guy in the cafe who's also the butler in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Oh yeah.
Whose name, for the life of me, I can't remember. Joseph Marcel. And there's that cod philosophical conversation between him and the Doctor, which doesn't quite work. But what I do like about it is that rather than the character, and he does, of course, reference, they talk about sugar and they talk about the legacy, therefore, of slavery and the rich, why it is that people from the Caribbean are in the UK and that sort of thing. And it talks about that history. But what I like as well is that it gives that character sufficient agency to not, especially from the pen of a Jewish writer, but not a person of color, right? It gives him the agency to say, I don't have to be defined by that. I'm actually just going to get on with it.
Yeah.
So I quite like the way that ends, even if the writing is a little bit clumsy and a little bit... It feels like it veers almost into Douglas Adams territory. It's trying to be a bit funny, but then it lands at the end really nicely. So I really like a lot about this. I really enjoyed watching it. It's pacey. I think... be interested to hear from you, because I don't know anything about the backstory to why this is directed by Andrew Morgan and John Nathan Turner uncredited, because that's I don't know what
I can't answer that specific question. I know that apparently they'd allocated extra money for this because they thought the script was worth it, and yet it still went quite significantly over budget, which is why Andrew Morgan was barred from ever directing for the show again as a result of the overspend. But yeah, it looks well.
But what I'll say is that I think that the money is well spent.
Oh my God, just on Daleks alone. It's
every penny of it ends up on the screen. We haven't even talked about the special weapons Dalek, but there's a reason why that prop, it's so fucking badass, the way it just blasts,
rolls in and just absolutely
bang, bang. And it's really well designed as well. The bum note
Yeah.
is the Doctor. I don't like the Doctor as cold manipulator. Like I say, Doctor Who, for me at its best, when I enjoy it most, it's about bringing hope and a way out. And he doesn't empower anybody because he doesn't tell anybody anything about what's going on. So he can't really empower people. And I find that kind of a bit dismaying. And then, of course, there are, and I really hesitate to say this because I kind of like Sylvester McCoy's performance is not great. He doesn't need to roll his R's every time one appears on the script. You know, it's just so mannered and so arch. And I just, whoever was directing, Morgan or John Nathan Turner, if they just had told him to calm it down. I remember watching an interview with Nick Meyer, the uncredited writer and very much credited director of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, saying with William Shatner that the way that he got him to give good performances, and he does get good performances out of him, is make him go, "That was great, another take, please." And by take 25, Shatner would be so exhausted and so spent and so defeated that he would give a good performance. And I don't suppose maybe that's what Morgan was trying to do, and that's why they went over budget. But it desperately needs him to dial it down from 11 to about 6.
Well, I'll address your two sort of bum notes first. I would say that I mean, I think there are occasions where I think McCoy, like, you sort of butt up against certainly what he's trying to do at this point. Now, I'd say he's definitely on a trajectory from, you know, the full extent of the clowning that you get in season 24 down to, you know, the actually, I think, much more sort of restrained performance that he puts in by the time you get to season 26.
Yeah.
I think this is a huge step forward. And I do in places enjoy, especially compared to, you know, the Sixth Doctor, you know, who sort of stands there in his pomp in a lot of things. I do enjoy the physicality of this Doctor from time to time when it is.
I would agree with that.
When it's called into when it comes into play, really. So I like, for example, after they've had the blown up the Dalek in the yard in episode 1. You know, and he's getting himself up and he's dusting himself off and he's slapping himself down. They go in the car and he's absolutely like twatting himself with a, you know, clothes brush in order to get all the crap out of his coat and everything. And there's just a bit of dirt and dust, and, you know, you get stuck in. And there's, you know, I definitely think this is a more, you know, I think that's a better use for his physicality than having him sort of play the spoons or pretend to slip over on ice all the time.
Oh yeah, and swinging onto the roof of the shuttlecraft as well.
And he can do stuff like that pretty well, especially when it's sort of slightly incidental. Like, I like, for example, when the van is about to leave in episode 1, and, you know, he opens one door and yells out to Ace, and then he kicks the other door open with his leg, and, you know, it's a real sort of,
that's really good.
It's a very gymnastic performance, which is obviously because, I mean, you know, he was, you know, essentially a circus performer, you know, in an earlier career, and I think that they're almost starting to find a level for that, which isn't just clowning. But yeah, I certainly think, you know,
I just wish he wasn't. I just wish vocally he wasn't doing it for the cheap seats.
Yes, totally. No, I'd agree with that. And I'd also agree with your, you know, your point that it's like I have less of a problem with it here, because I think there is so much kind of improvisation that the Doctor has to do, particularly as his plan sort of starts to go awry, that it's not like he's just sort of sitting back moving things on the chessboard. There is a sense of peril, I think, in terms of whether he's going to pull all this off. But this is a very different mode of storytelling for Doctor Who, in that the Doctor turns up with a plan to nail the Daleks, and he doesn't tell anyone that is his plan, and he doesn't tell anyone what his plan is, but he turns up with a single goal in mind. It's not like they just happen to land in 1963 and, oh my goodness, there's Daleks there, we'd better stop them. It's like he turns up to smash them, and it's a bit of a close run thing because he's not banking on a second set of Daleks turning up, but that is what he does. And you know, that's a very different characterization of the Doctor as, you know, being a guy who turns up to effect change. You know, it's also, you know, the Happiness Patrol makes that explicit, where basically, you know, he turns up in an unjust regime and announces at the beginning, I'm going to take this regime down in a night, basically, and that's what he does. You know, I think the extent to which it bothers me is waxes and wanes depending on the quality of the scripts, really, and the extent to which that sort of gets in the way of the story. And I think there's enough going on here for it to be a more sort of broader concern that it's like, I don't think this is a very good route to go down in characterising the Doctor. But it didn't. That's more of a sort of conceptual concern that I have, rather than something that actively bothered me too much while watching it. I would say, those sort of concerns aside, I think this is fucking brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed watching it. I think it is, it showboats in the way that like a first script by a writer in his 20s is always going to do, and he tries to cram in absolutely every single idea that he's ever had, and there's a lot of, you know, like you say, the cafe scene, there's no need for that scene to be there, and it is done perhaps not with quite enough subtlety to distract from the fact that, you know, it's a bit of showboating to say this is what Doctor Who does now. It's like we're proper drama now or something. But it's good enough to get it over the line, and actually, as you say, at the end becomes sort of quite sweet and touching. I think comfortably the best story of the 80s. I'm not sure. Maybe I don't know. I think it's
certainly the best story from the 80s I've seen.
Yeah, and maybe I'm being more indulgent on it than I would be otherwise had we not watched the whole of Trial of a Time Lord last month. But Jesus Christ, I'm not just saying that to be glib. On every conceivable level, in 2 years, what a phenomenal step on this is, in terms of the way it looks, in terms of the way the situation, that the whole setup, the story is so deeply interrogated in order to have something interesting to say and do with all of the pieces, rather than just being, you know, you like the Daleks, here they are. And, you know, it's been observed before, Silver Nemesis closes the season and has, by sheer coincidence, a completely identical plot, in that it involves one of the Doctor's classic series baddies turning up in squaring off against some neo-Nazis in its pursuit of a
some old school Nazis. They're old school Nazis, aren't they?
In pursuit of a Gallifreyan superweapon. You know, so it's like the plots are identical, and if you want to see how, you know, bad, how good, either to appreciate how good this is or how poor Silver Nemesis is, you know, there's your point of comparison. But everything is just so well thought through in this. There are ideas, you know, like bursting off the screen, stuff that we've never seen before, like, you know, the little girl running the Dalek battle computer, because that's not only a great image, but that's how evil the Daleks are, in that they'll actually plug a child in to do this. You know, that's how fucking evil the Daleks are. And all of the bits that you don't, all of the texture, so like the cafe scene, for example, that's pure texture. It's just there to add texture. But as I say, Trial of a Time Lord, there's no texture. There's just like, the Trial of a Time Lord just presumes that you'll turn up because it's Doctor Who and you want to see the Doctor, and oh look, here's the Master, and blah blah blah. And it you know, there's no effort made. Whereas 2 years on, this looks better. It's better written. You know, it's more tightly edited. The location work is fantastic. It really is. I believe the first time the Doctor Who does a recent period setting for a historical. I could be wrong in the classic series, but you know, it's well within the comfort zone of like what the BBC with the costume department can pull off. So, you know, it looks great. And
unless you count Mordrin Undead, of course, there's a slight.
That's true. All right, yeah, I'll doff my.
Like 2 years.
Yeah,
it's quite unfair.
So yeah, I mean, just an absolute step on in 2 years' time from Trial of the Time Lord is just amazing. I mean, this feels like a series reborn. I also think I find it really interesting. I mean, obviously it is. a lot of the McCoy era writers, the new writers are, like, I don't mean this necessarily negatively. Like, they want to make Doctor Who about something, and they are, to greater or lesser degrees, quite sledgehammer in terms of how they put in sort of the thematic meat of the story. Yeah. And it's not exactly a deep read on this to see how explicitly it parallels, certainly racist and kind of neo-fascist undercurrents in 60s Britain with the Daleks. But I also think it's I was thinking, because I've seen this a lot, but I was thinking about it this time around in the context of what Terry Nation did with the Daleks. And I think watching a lot of Terry Nation Dalek stories for this podcast has been sort of building this idea in my mind that, obviously his creation of the Daleks was built out of his wartime experiences, and the Daleks are a Nazi allegory. That's right there. He said as much. But what doesn't get commented on is how all of his scripts, to a greater or lesser extent, are turning over different aspects of World War II to re-examine them. And I remember when we reviewed Planet of the Daleks, so 1973, I believe, he's moved on from like looking at different aspects of ethnic cleansing during the Second World War and the invasion and the home front and all that, through to how we remember the Second World War. So there's that speech that the Third Doctor gets at the end where he is saying, when you go back to Skaro and you're telling stories of this, don't glamorise it, tell them the truth of it, tell them the cost, which to my mind immediately rang out that at this point Terry Nation is looking at how World War II is being remembered in the late 60s, early 70s through things like Where Eagles Dare, and it's become jingoistic daring do, really. And he's saying, no, you've got to remember what actually happened. And
which is a fair point.
Which is a deeply fair point. It's one of the reasons Terry Nation is not a brilliant writer of drama, but as an ideas man, I think he's sorely underrated, and I think this is one of the big themes that I feel like I keep returning to on this podcast. But Aronovich pulls this round and takes it a stage further, because he's now setting a Dalek story which echoes all of Terry Nation's imagery, but he's setting it directly in the cultural context in which Nation was writing. And yeah, like you say, he's not glamorising Britain of the 60s. He's sort of saying only 18 years on from the end of World War II, this is a place where, what happened in Germany could happen over here. It's a racist society. There are fascist undercurrents. There are fascist groups assembling, and it's also ordinary people kind of driving it. So, the Silver Nemesis Nazis are a very organised paramilitary. They call themselves the Fourth Reich, and they wear uniforms and they have swastikas and things like that. But here, it's a builder's merchant. It's a disaffected squaddy. It's kind of ordinary people who have already started to, if not forget the experience of the war, certainly are not handling the peace very well and are capable of making some terrible mistakes. And I really, that really struck me this time round, that Aronovich not only honours Terry Nation by taking his original imagery and, the original allegory and really driving it home, but by bringing in the context, the reason, not just what Terry Nation wrote about the Daleks, but the reason why he was writing about the Daleks in the first place, and then setting a story in Terry Nation's living history, or professional, career history, I think is just phenomenal.
Yeah,
I think it's deeply astute.
I completely agree, which is why I feel bad for saying what I'm about to say.
Go on.
Which is because I truly do agree. But I would like to point out as well that having been critical of a few Seventh Doctor stories, I have always been with you in praising the ambition of the era.
Totally.
And it is so pleasing to see Cartmel's vision realised just this once in so well. Obviously, totally. He's got a great writer, but he has got a vision for what the show can be. This delivers it. And I don't like the scheming Doctor idea very much. I can put up with it with a story, especially one that runs along at such a pace and is just so whiz bang and has such a great plot. I can definitely go along with it. I agree with all the thematic stuff you say, and I think that Ben Aronovich has done a great job here. But I feel there is one of those accidental moments, a bit like, no one could question for one moment Mark Gatiss's liberal credentials, and yet he accidentally ends up making a sort of anti-immigration argument in The Unquiet Dead, right?
Yeah.
And for a show, for a serial that is so preoccupied with, or so rightly focused on Nazism, fascism, how close you are to to people who might be thinking those things, and how that era we might look at it. For all the Nazis on screen, there's only one person who commits genocide in this, and it's the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I truly believe it's in that same level of kind of accidental plot thing. I don't think
it's
that's
a double
the
genocide as well, because I mean the Daleks are not the only inhabitants of Skaro, unless the Daleks had by that point completely wiped out the peace-loving Thals.
Well, let's assume that they basically had.
Right.
But even
that might be a bit too much to bear, but yes.
Yeah, but like, he certainly, the Doctor certainly here does not show any of the scruples that he demonstrated in, for example, Genesis of the Daleks.
No. No, this time he's here to finish the job. That's the.
And I think that there is an interesting point that could have been made, and I suspect it's one that would have been right up Cartmel's and maybe even Aronovich's streets, about the is it the Karl Popper's paradox of freedom?
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about this before, that if you tolerate Nazism, then tolerance itself will die. So
yes.
If you need to draw a line there in order to. So yeah, I do think it's basically just a kind of plot accident that he's the Doctor, he has to defeat the Daleks, and no one cares if they get killed. But by the same token, the show has, I mean, Terry Nation himself, literally in Genesis of the Daleks, says, "Do I not make myself as guilty as them if I do this thing?" And it, I'm really nitpicking. I loved this, but it's bum
not nitpicking at all. It's not nitpicking at all. I mean, it is also. It's also interesting to say this is the second time in as many months that we've watched a story where the Doctor commits a genocide, and I'm actually also certain that there are probably a bunch of accidental or uncommented on genocides. Maybe someone could write in, and maybe that could be a theme episode where the Doctor commits genocide by wiping out a whole alien race. But yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, it certainly sits uncomfortably. What I would say, not necessarily in defence, but I mean, I don't think it's entirely accidental, because I think that's the point at the very downbeat ending that this has. So, it ends with the Doctor and Ace attending Mike's funeral. And again, in terms of talking about just the little extra bits of texture where, like, especially a lot of 80s Doctor Who, has such a high body count anyway. The fact that they choose to linger on the death of a character and then show afterwards there's a funeral where all his family turn up and are very sad about it. It's just like, it's just an extra bit of detail that I enjoy. But, Ace says to the Doctor, "We did good, didn't we?" And the Doctor says, that he's not sure, and that that it will have to pan out, whether or not this was the right decision to make. And I am, yes, I think rightly and reasonably uncomfortable with the idea of the Doctor as this sort of avenging, genocidal sort of maniac. But it certainly suggests, to me, I very much read that scene as saying that the moral cost of this is something that the Doctor has considered and weighed up, and he personally has certainly knows that he is compromised by having to do what he has done, but he thinks on balance it was the right thing to do. So I agree with you that I don't. I don't think it's something the series should do necessarily, or certainly quite as casually, because equally it's only a small scene at the end, and I think it's a bit blink and you'll miss it. But I certainly think that is at least meant to be addressed in the texture of that scene, that the Doctor certainly feels that there is a moral cost to what he's done, rather than going, hooray, we've beaten the Daleks, now the universe is safe.
It's just that, like, Moffat would have had the Hand of Omega trap them in a bubble orbit around a time pocket with a supernova star that will never explode, or something. It would have been.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's like, I think many writers would look for a sort of third way solution to this kind of thing. And no, I mean, it's like the Doctor. The Doctor has.
On the other hand, it's perhaps not surprising that a Jewish writer in this case goes, no, they're Nazis. They just have to die.
You just need to get rid of them. Yeah,
yeah.
And
You just need to get rid of them. And so that's what I mean that's why I referenced Karl Popper's Paradox of Freedom. I actually meant, of course, I do apologise for all the philosophy listeners. I do, of course, mean Karl Popper's Paradox of Tolerance. Yeah. But if you take that to its conclusion, then you would say, well, look, if you don't eradicate this threat, then it will eradicate us.
And Aronovich has said in interviews that it's like, he didn't want to write a story where the Doctor sort of turned up and stumbled into the plot. That it's like he was drawn to the idea that the Doctor had a plan in this, and the plan was he was going to tackle the Daleks. He was going to sort that problem out, and he does with
extreme prejudice.
Well, also not very successfully, given that the Daleks stories that we've had.
Well, I suppose the saving grace is that it isn't genocide, because clearly there are so many of the fuckers lying around.
Millions. Yeah,
but no. All I will say is that there is a degree to which we've spent the last 5-10 minutes talking about that point. On the other hand, they're the bad guys, and the goody killed them, and that's quite fun to watch from time to time.
It's certainly what happens a lot in Doctor Who, yes, but just maybe on the less of a sort of scale. But other than that, I mean, it's a bunch of great stuff thrown at the screen. I mean, that episode 1 cliffhanger is so good. I mean, it's working on multiple meta levels. Like, but bearing in mind that even though there have been plenty of Doctor Who stories with "of the Daleks" in the title, where you've waited 25 minutes and the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1 is the reveal of the Daleks. Whereas this obviously happens halfway through. But
so smart.
But first of all, it's like you get the Dalek early, and then you get this Dalek. In the and obviously it's super meta. It's like the most postmodern cliffhanger in classic Doctor Who, but it's also. Totally. Really well shot.
That's some metabolics that really lands, isn't it?
And it's like, McCoy, in terms of doing his sort of shouting and scrambling around, he's great there, because you really get the sense of panic that he's like suddenly like horrified by what this Dalek can now do, and him hammering on the door, and then all of the Dalek sort of POV shots that they do with the like little graphics and the heat seeking, like the sort of slightly like a night vision sort of effects that they put on it are all so exciting. And then you've got the special weapons Dalek is just absolutely badass. And then all of these other just sort of little characters, like
like Professor Jensen.
Sorry, which one's she? Is it she?
Pamela Salem.
Oh, Pamela Salem. Is that his name?
The kind of Liz Shaw stand-in.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they don't get a huge amount to do, but they.
I thought she was great. Very little to do, but Peter Halliday is the vicar, the blind vicar.
Well, I was going to mention the blind vicar because, like, that's such a lovely moment, and it's like, the Doctor's got it all mapped out that he knows that it's so weird, isn't it? It's like, that's the thing, but it's like, and he's like, I must say, Doctor, your pallbearers are very quiet, and it's like this thing is gliding in, and it's like. Also, the milkman dropping off the milk outside the funeral parlour, and then the Doctor walks in and he's holding the milk. It's just these little things where, I mean, And I guess this is where such a contrast to Trial of a Time Lord can be made. It's just like the love and the care that has gone into putting this together. I mean, yeah, it doesn't all work. You can definitely nitpick, and I think there are some sort of conceptual sort of holes at the heart of it.
Captain Gilmore arriving, it's so much like it is kind of like there's a big kind of Third Doctor vibe to the whole energy
totally.
behind this,
Yeah.
isn't there?
Totally.
On the subject of the Third Doctor, Dursley McClendon, of course, played Sergeant Mike Smith, who inexplicably is in civvies throughout and is allowed to live at home. I'm not quite sure what army unit he's been in, but
he wears that
also,
very fetching sort of sheepskin jacket, though, doesn't he? Which I think is
and also
terrific,
Group Captain Gilmore appears to be wearing an RAF cap, so I'm not quite sure what branch of the military. Anyway, it's maybe one of our more military history minded listeners can maybe write in and help us with that. But I just thought Dursley McClendon, who I thought gives a very good performance, understated performance as the turncoat army operative, just so physically reminiscent of Richard Franklin. Like,
yeah.
It's the spit of Mike Yates.
I mean, absolutely.
Who also is a turncoat kind of military.
Yes. No, I mean he definitely gives like big unit energy, really, and I mean it's sort of.
And the parallels are not like accidental. There's a lot of fan wank continuity bollocks in this, and those parallels, like the Doctor actually misspeaks and calls the captain brigadier at one point. Mike Smith is pretty. I'd be very surprised if Mike Yates weren't front and center in people's minds when it came to casting that.
And the sort of retcon style rewriting of what the Doctor was doing or the explanation of what the Doctor was doing on Earth for the first Doctor was doing on Earth in the first place in 1963.
Hiding the Hand of Omega.
Which is fine. I'll sort of let it go because it doesn't get in the way of the story. This isn't Attack of the Cybermen where if you didn't have a working knowledge of the 10th planet, you wouldn't understand what Attack of the Cybermen was all about. This does at least handhold you through it, and this is, even though this isn't nominally the 25th anniversary story, it's definitely the start of the 25th anniversary season, and I think I mean to the extent to which it honours the show's roots, I think is a good celebration. But no, just you mentioning Dursley McClendon there does sort of remind me that obviously Remembrance of the Daleks has had a bit of commentary more recently with the premiere, I think was it start of this year, of Russell T Davies's AIDS drama It's a Sin, and he's mentioned that in quite a few interviews that Dursley McClendon was, I think not a close friend, but certainly someone he knew fairly well. And as he said, he was terribly excited because it was the first person he'd ever met who had actually been in Doctor Who. And obviously, Dursley McClendon very tragically died of AIDS in the mid-90s, and also very tragically has a very short IMDb credit list sort of as a result. And again, watching it this time around, I mean, if anyone has not seen It's a Sin, you should 100% watch it. It is an absolutely, I mean, I say this as a diehard Russell T Davies Doctor Who fan. It is Russell T Davies's masterpiece. I mean, it's an absolutely astonishing piece of work, and you will absolutely cry buckets watching it. But it's very. This is very directly and Dursley McClendon is very directly referenced by the fact that Ollie Alexander's character Richie in It's a Sin has his basically his one television credit of note is a small role in a Dalek story in 80s Doctor Who, and it obviously is an opportunity then to have a bit of fun with some Daleks in It's a Sin, and he plays a character called Trooper Lyndon in this sort of fake 80s Dalek story. But it just sort of got me thinking a bit more about obviously the tragedy of that situation. I think It's a Sin very powerfully makes the point of just all of these lives cut short, all this potential that was unlived. Richie in It's a Sin is capable of so much, and yet he doesn't really get to do much acting because he dies so young. Sorry, spoilers at the end. But something I just found it quite moving to watch Remembrance of the Daleks again in that context, and just think that, yeah, I mean, it is absolutely tragic that clearly a very talented actor died so young of such a horrible disease, but also, you know, in a sense, you know, doesn't make up for it. But there's a stroke of good fortune of the fact that he happened to be in Doctor Who. And there will be so many actors that we will never have heard of who died during that period. But, you know, thanks to being in Doctor Who, this thing that people treasure and that's so important to people, means that, you know, here we are, you know, 30 years on, or from that story being made, and we are talking about Dursley McLendon and admiring his performance and sort of raising a glass to what a good actor he was. So, yeah, it was just I felt. I mean, obviously, I cried buckets watching It's a Sin, but I felt quite moved watching that this time round with that context. And yeah, I think he delivers a phenomenal performance. And yeah, just wanted to end on that note.
Floor 2.
All right, you're on the airlock. All weapons primed. Settings to maximum.
Floor 1.
They're breaking through, sir. 10 seconds and counting.
Remember, if they get through, we lose the crystal. And if we lose that, it's the end of the
Floor
world.
0.
Open fire!
We can cut there. Thanks, everyone. Nicely done, but we're going to go again. Let's reset. Richie, it will take a little while, so we're just going to pick up a close-up on you. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Which bit?
Lose the crystal, lose the world. Just stay there, and thank you.
Just wanted to mention a final comment from Tom Turlow in the chat. That the special weapons Daleks seemed impossibly flash and exciting, appearing back in 1988. Although he said he was not sure he was watching he was not sure at the time that he was witnessing a creative renaissance in the show. He wasn't aware of that at the time, but as it turns out, on reflection, he was.
Yeah.
Something that we also pointed out. I hope it isn't crass to say that I thought that your comments there around Dursley McLendon and that tragedy of those lives that were cut short and the opportunity that was lost was I mean this in all sincerity, it's not meant to be a joke, far more moving to listen to than the same thematic meat sort of being dealt with in The Rings of Akhaten, where the leaf crumbling away to signify the life that could have been lived was somehow meant to land. And yeah, certainly more moving to hear you discuss it in the terms of It's a Sin and the AIDS crisis back in the 80s and 90s than some crumbling foliage.
Well, also, how did that leaf last so long? I mean, how long do leaves last if you keep them in a handbag? I think
if you keep them pressed, because it was pressed in a book, wasn't it?
That's true.
So I think do you know what? I don't know.
That's well, okay. There you go. Sure, that if someone can write in on that, if they know or care to talk any more about the Rings of Akhaten.
Yeah, philosophers wanting to pick us up on Karl Popper and any botanists or whatever you would call yourselves that arboreologists or whatever.
It's been a wide-ranging show tonight, hasn't it, John? We've covered a lot of ground. I think I'm absolutely exhausted.
Listen, I am nothing if not a Renaissance man.
Very
I
true.
Am nothing.
Very true. Well, on that note, thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in to watch us live tonight. Thank you for your comments. Always useful to.
No, seriously, both of you. Thanks so much. It's always appreciated.
Almost literally true on these live streams, but the podcast listenership is where the real action is at. If you want to get in touch with us, or if you've got anything to say about any of these stories, emails to hello@illexplainlater.com.
I'll explain later.
Facebook.com/illexplainlater. Twitter @explainlaterpod is always a good place to get hold of us. And
well, sometimes work depending.
Work depending. Yeah. I mean, if John has a lot of work on, that's a very good time to get in touch with him on Twitter because you're likely to get a reply. But
yeah, I like to sack it off,
yeah,
so
totally.
That's fine. Yeah.
We'll be back with another live stream. Thank you very much for listening.
Same bad time,
yes.
Same bad channel.
Yes, keep an eye out on the socials. We'll try and announce what stories we're doing in advance so that if you want to watch
and I will try to watch them in advance.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've always managed that. We've never started one of these podcasts with you with the telly on in the background. But
I finished watching
that.
Remembrance of the Daleks 3 minutes before we started this podcast. Dear. I'm cutting it finer each time.
I know. I like
getting
it.
closer and closer to the wire.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much to everyone listening wherever you are, and thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt.
And we'll be back next month. See you soon.
Till next time.